And I would like to introduce Cory for the audience. Probably lots of people are going to be seeing this, this presentation later on in the recording. And one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be here with Cory is because I've been really involved in the publication of Cory's work into Spanish and trying to fill up the gap of the little that we have in this kind of radical materials. Yes, sexo es una palabra divertida. And how people have been so happily shocked by your books in Spanish, and how much there's lots of people awaiting your third book in Spanish. And ya sabes, sexo. And I don't know, just to let you know that you have a huge pile of fans in Spanish, really inspired by your different take into sexual education. I would like to say that Cory is a queer person that is from Canada, raised in the 70s, so we have pretty much the same age. The child of a sex educator and an author, and no surprise that, you know, children's librarian and sex therapist, and so it's not a surprise that you became a queer author writing in sex ed, and how much you are invested in an intersectional approach to sexual education. All your characters show a racial background. We can see disability, we can see different backgrounds, so we don't need to have one book to talk about disability, one book to talk about ethnicity, one book to talk about sexuality, and rather you bring all these topics together, which I think is teaching us how to approach sex education in a way that it doesn't compare, you know, have different boxes for different topics, but rather brings all the topics together. So I won't be using much more of your time, just to say that we admire your work, that it's a pleasure for us to have you here in this group of scholars and activists and poets and artists that are thinking about sex education. I'm just reading, and Estelle is saying that we had no interpretation, but it's gonna be now. So for those of you that are following us in Spanish, podéis seguir la interpretación ahora, ha habido un problema. And it is a schedule pretty much that you have around 40 minutes or less for your presentation, and then we can have a discussion afterwards, like 20 minutes or so. So do as you like, and if there's anything that we can help you out, let us know.
So just to clarify, is the interpretation okay now?
Yes, yes. Estelle is just writing in the chat box that there was no interpretation for a moment, and it's back. So
okay.
Yeah, those of that people that would like to follow the talk in Spanish can do so.
Thank you. You can. The thing I can ask you to help is I can't do two things at once, so I won't look at the chat. So if anything comes up, that's
my task. Don't worry about it.
Good. Can I just ask, can the interpreters hear me okay? Is the volume okay for them? Okay. Okay, well, thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to start by actually offering a visual description if anyone can't see me and wants to know. So as Lucas said, I'm a 50-year-old white queer person. I have brown and gray hair, it sticks up in the front, and I smile a lot when I talk. Right now I'm wearing a shirt, a button-down shirt of many colors. My nails are painted, and I'm sitting at a desk. Behind me, there are lots of books on the shelf. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me, and you, Lucas. I think if you hadn't found my books and brought them into Spanish language, I wouldn't be here. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone who's here now for your time. Also, I want to thank the interpreters. I speak English and I know American Sign Language, but I don't speak or read or write Spanish. So the interpreters are making it possible for us to communicate across this sort of difference, which is so much of what working in sexuality and gender is. I'm going to do my best to sort of talk at a good pace, and just want to invite interpreters or the audience, anyone, if I talk too fast, please tell me to slow down. I'm not so interested in hearing my own voice. I like to actually talk to people, so I want to make sure that people can follow what I'm saying. One of the barriers we face when it comes to writing and talking about sexuality and gender, whether we're writing books or educational curriculum, is I think that sometimes when we're with like-minded people, we think we speak the same language, right? So we may understand that everyone here agrees, that gender is diverse and that's a good thing, and that we all share the same beliefs and ideas. So then we start using language like we talk about gender inclusive or comprehensive sex education, but we don't always explain what we mean when we say it. And I think this is a problem for us to move together forward, because when you start to be specific, to ask people, well, what do you believe about gender and sexuality? How do you think it should be taught? We find many differences, which is good. Differences are okay, but we have to recognize that they are there. If we want to, I think we do share some goals, big goals we share, but to get there, we really need to be very specific. And this is one of the things I love about writing for young people, because young people require, and they expect, and they certainly deserve answers to questions that many of us adults think have already been answered, but they really haven't. So when I write for young people, it forces me to answer explain everything, explain my perspective on everything, right? So it's not that I'm saying no universal truths, but rather saying, when I say gender, I mean this. I find in a lot of sex education, people use the word gender and they offer maybe a 2-sentence definition and then they just go on. And I'm 52 years old. I still don't understand my gender. It is something that's sometimes good for me and bad, but I cannot explain what I think gender is in 2 sentences. And so then to talk to a 10-year-old who has many questions and say, well, gender is this thing, and let's move to the next lesson, I don't think it works. I want to start by telling a bit about myself and how I came to do this work. And then I'm going to read a little bit from the second book, which is available in many languages, English and Spanish and French and Italian. And then we'll leave lots of time for questions and discussion. So when I was a child, when I was a kid, I knew I was different. And everyone else knew I was different too. Other children and their parents would treat me like they knew there was something different and wrong with me. They would use a lot of names, mean names, they would call me to point out what they thought was different about me. Of course, they didn't know what was different about me, and neither did I at the time. I was 5 years old and 6 years old and 7 years old. But they used words to say, this is what I think is different about you. I was born in the kind of body that people call a boy, but I grew up in Canada in the 1970s in a kind of middle-class Jewish home. And at that time, the sort of fashion in education and politics was gender equality. That's what they called it, gender equality. And I don't know what people thought that meant. I don't know the theory, but I can tell you what it meant to an adolescent child. What it meant was I was told again and again that it was okay for boys to be a little like girls. That was okay. And the girls could be whatever they wanted. So in school and in books and in television, I was told boys can cry. You know, I was told crying, it's a girl thing, but it's okay for boys to do it. And then I was told that girls can be the president or that girls can be an astronaut. And that was it. That was what gender equality looked like. And of course, no one told me that there were more than boys and girls. And that is information I really needed. My life would have been much better if early in my life, someone had just said, by the way, there's more than boys and girls. Now that I'm 52 years old and I have lots of language to talk about my own gender, and I spend a lot of time with young people of all ages, I've become very interested in the stories that we tell ourselves about why we are different. Because there's so many things that make us different from one another, right? Including our ability to hold those differences. So why do we tell ourselves stories about some difference, but not others? Why does gender become the thing that makes me different when there's many things that make me different? Around the world, I think gender has become the big story of difference now, right? So in the media, on the internet, we see news articles and websites and podcasts, all stories about gender. Many of the stories are about how gender is diverse, and that's good. Not just good, but it's necessary, that we need it to be diverse, that it's part of evolution. There are other stories that are lies, untrue stories, that say that queer and trans adults are trying to make young people queer and trans. These stories say the only thing that's new is that there's pressure to be queer or trans. Now, anyone who spends time with young people and pays attention knows that that's a lie, right? We know that young people cannot be made into something they are not. We know also that they can be bullied, they can be harassed, they can be hurt, so that they pretend to be something they are not, right? This is very common. This is what we call gender socialization, right? And we all experience it. I've never met anyone who didn't experience at some point being told they were doing gender wrong and they better do it right. But we can't make children queer or trans. It doesn't work that way. When it comes to public conversations about gender, what we hear depends so much on who we listen to. Right, so Lucas, I was asking Val this question, like, how do we survive with so much violence coming at us? And of course, part of that is, who are we listening to? So for me, part of the answer for me to Lucas's question is I listen to young people. That's mostly who I try to listen to. And when I listen to young people, I hear and I see them leading us into new and more complicated ways to think about gender. They are making new language all the time. They make art. They're also, sort of throwing away many of our old expected rules, including the old queer rules and the old gay rules and the old lesbian rules. So when you listen to young people, I think it's very clear things are getting bigger and more complicated, and I think better. When you listen to older people, not all older people, but some older people, what you hear is they want more bullying, they want more violence, they want more repression. They want fewer options. This is why I choose to listen to young people. This is why I write for young people. And this is the reason for the title of my talk, which is, if you want to know, just ask. Because if we're asking the question, how can we create education for young people that supports their sexual and gender development, we should start by asking young people. And when we ask ourselves, when we ask older people, I think all of the questions that Val offered are amazing. I think those are not the questions I ever hear. You know, when I work with educators in United States or Canada, it's very narrow-minded. It's very medical, very biomedical. It is not a lot about feelings, and it's not a lot about conflict. So for me, the place to start is asking young people. And this is how I make these books. I should explain that I will write a draft, and then Fiona Smith, my collaborator, she will draw pencil drawings, and then I take it around to young people and to adults and to families in like a binder. I just open up the binder and I sit and I watch them read it. And then I talk to them, and they'll tell me, you know, the things they like, or they'll tell me a place where they were left out. You know, they'll say like, well, you know, you didn't say this, and this is true for me. So this is how I make the books. They're very collaborative. And also share a kind of tip about listening to young people. I have found that in terms of who I listen to, when I'm writing books, it's not helpful to listen to the age the books are geared towards. So if I write a book for 7-year-olds, and I go to a 7-year-old and I say, what do you think of this book? it's not that helpful because the 7-year-old, they don't know what they don't know yet, right? So they will say a nice thing or they don't like the drawings, but they don't have a lot of depth of what to say. If you go a little bit older, older people are quite helpful. So when I write a book for 7-year-olds, I was asking a lot of 13 and 14-year-olds, what do you think? Because they've learned more, they've sort of survived, they've gotten up here, and they remember what it was like just a few years ago. So this is a very simple idea that I'm sharing, that I've learned, which is we have to ask questions and we have to listen to the answers. Because like young people, adults don't know what they don't know either, right? So I can tell you, because I spend time with young people, that the word trans, in English, the word transgender, means a completely different thing now to a 16-year-old now than it did 15 years ago, 10 years ago, for me. You know, my understanding of being queer and my understanding of transness is so different than young people's right now. And so we don't know. I don't know what I don't know. And so this is why I have to start by asking questions. I want to offer one other simple idea, and it's not new, but I think it's always worth reminding us when we get together, which is that if you're interested in doing this work, in creating material about sexuality and gender for young people, I think it's important to ask yourself 2 questions. First, why are you doing the work? And second, what are the goals for the work? And like, what do you want the world to look like if your work is good and successful? So this is different than, this is not learning objectives or learning outcomes. It's kind of bigger questions, like the questions that Val has offered. I think that we need to ask ourselves these questions, and we need answers so that when we are working with young people and they ask, we give them answers. Because again, I think that you know, most of us didn't grow up with very good sex education. And most of us didn't grow up with as many options around gender as we may have liked. And so we come to this work with our own, you know, trauma and pain and confusion. So we really need to ask ourselves these basic questions. So I will share my answers. I do this work for myself and for my community. And I also think that I do it for everyone. Because I think that talking about gender and sexuality lets us talk about some things that make us different and things that we share, what connects us. And this for me is this is how I survive, because I've always felt different and alone. And it meant when I was a teenager, I almost didn't survive. And so I need in my work to be thinking, I need to acknowledge that I'm different, but I also need the connection. And so this is why I do the work. And my goal for the work is to make things just a little bit better for the next generation when it comes to gender. And this is my goal, because this is how my family taught me to live. And this is the kind of elder that I want to become. For me, better, of course, we need to explain what better means, right? Better does not mean equal, right? I have, for myself, only for me, I have no interest in fighting for people to have the right to equal access to a system that is corrupt and that is violent and that gets in the way of our liberation. So for me, I don't care about who's president. That's okay if it's someone else's goal, but it's just not my goal. Better for me means the opportunity to explore on our own terms, using our own language, and to imagine our futures, and to do it without violence, and hopefully with a bit of help. So in my work, I don't do this work because I have a vision of what gender health is or how we should be. I don't know how we should be. I don't know how young people should be or old people. I don't know the best way. I really want the chance to imagine and to do that with other people and to not experience violence. So when I'm working, when I'm writing, if it's a curriculum or if it's a book, I focus as much on not telling people how to be as I do on showing them options that are available. A lot of sex education, I think people think of it as like, you show people the way to do it. Here is how the clitoris works, or this is what puberty blockers are. We think of sex education as a lot of like, I'm going to show you this thing. That's important. It's part of the work, but it doesn't help us imagine. It doesn't help us imagine our own futures if we don't fit into the options you're giving us. So for me, I had access to all the sex education. My father was a sex therapist. He's a medical doctor. He became a sex therapist. And my mother was a children's librarian. I had all the books there were, but none of them fit for me. Even though when you open the book and you look at a picture, it looked like me, right? It was a white person and it was sort of a normative body. But because for me, I was not a boy, even though I had those parts. The books that I had, they didn't fit, so they didn't help. So I could never see myself. So for me, when I'm working, I'm really thinking about how to not tell people who they are, or even like give them like a series of options about who they can be. Because when we give them a list, then often it's like, well, I don't see myself on that list. And this is very hard. It's very hard to do because young people need somewhere to start, right? So it's like, how do we offer some information? How do we say, you know, there are many gender identities and here are a few, and also say, these are not all of them because they don't all exist yet, because you may have a new one, right? There may not be the language yet for who you are and how you feel. You know, the problem is the power dynamic with a teacher is that when a teacher says, here are the gender identities, then most students think, oh, those are the options. I have to tick a box. Which one am I? So for me in my writing, this is what I try to do. I try to resist giving a checklist. Another way of putting this is that I resist normativity, or that there's one way to be something, right? Because now we have, you know, here in North America, we have trans normativity, right? There are so many TV shows and websites that tell you this is the right way to be trans, you know, and it's this or it's this. And very soon we'll also have non-binary normativity, because with representation and with capitalism, we get what is normal. So for me, if I'm against anything in my work, I'm against the force of normal. I always want to be working against, pushing back normal and pointing it out. I don't want to offer in my books, I don't want to offer a new set of rules. I think that's what we should not do, to offer a new set of rules about gender and sexuality. What I try to do is offer validation, right? So Lucas mentioned the way the books look. There's so many different people in the books, and the hope is that people will see a little bit of themselves, right? Not all of themselves, but a little bit. So that's validation. That young people, that we all have knowledge, and even some wisdom, even if we're young, that we know things about gender, that we know things about sex. We may not have language, but we still have knowledge. So I want young people to know that, and I want them to know that sex and gender are always relational, right? So this is the same thing I think Val was saying, that that we live in relation to others. So you can't learn these things, you know, in isolation on your own. And so this is why my newer book is called, the title is You Know Sex, because I want young people to know that they already know something. In my experience, most young people think that, well, when a young person is with an adult, they might say, I know a lot, or maybe with their friends. But when you get them one-on-one, they mostly think that there's things they don't know. They think about sex and as a kind of deficit. They don't know anything about sex. It's something that you learn when you're older. But I think this is not true. And for me, it's very helpful to start with young people and say, you do know. You know about your body. You know what feels good. You know some things that feel bad. You might hopefully know how to say no to things and yes to things. This is all part of sex, right? So this is what I want them to know. And mostly what I want is them to know that there's a future that's possible. Because for me as a queer person, this was what was most dangerous, was that I believed there was no future. And so I almost didn't make it, right? And so I want them to know there are futures that are possible, but they need to know that I don't know what they look like, right? Like if we say your future is possible, you're going to look like this. You know, you'll have a job, you'll have a partner, you maybe have a dog or kids, whatever. That doesn't work because maybe that isn't their future, right? And I will say that, you know, in sex education, of course, we have people who in English, they use the word asexual. So asexual is again, I'm hoping this is going to translate. It's understood as an orientation. There are people who are, their orientation includes not being interested in, not feeling sexual desire and not being interested in sexual energy or sexual activities. But these people need sex education too, right? And so when we center sex education on sexual activity, when we say, in the future, you'll have sex, it'll be good. That's not good because for some people, they won't have sex. And also for some people, it'll never be good. So I don't want to tell someone it's going to be good because I don't want to lie. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now. And what I want to do is read to you a few pages from the second book, which in English is called Sex is a Funny Word. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully it's going to work. Okay, let's see. Okay, so, okay, so let me go into slideshow just a second here. Okay, so, so these are the books that we've made. I include so you can see the Spanish ones. So right now there's 3, and the books, so they're for different ages. So the first one, called What Makes a Baby, is for 4 to 6-year-olds-ish. And the second one I'm going to read from is a little bit 7 to 9. It's before puberty. And then the new one, the third one, is for puberty. Sorry, I just realized I need to, I just need to look at my notes for a second. I'm sorry, I'm not good at the technology. Right, okay, so yeah, I wanna just tell you that these pages are from, the pages I'm gonna share are from the second book. And these pages are from a section on sex assignment at birth and on gender. And the book is big, the book is 190 pages, so you're just gonna see a little bit. And I'm gonna read now. And I'm gonna read in English. I will show you the pages in Spanish, but I'm gonna do the reading in English. Once upon a time, actually everywhere and all the time, babies are born. When a baby is born, the doctor or midwife who helped it be born looks at its new naked body. If they look down and see a penis, they say, it's a boy. If they look down and see a vulva, they say, it's a girl. Sometimes the people looking see a big clitoris and think it's a penis. Sometimes they see a small penis and think it's a clitoris. Sometimes they aren't sure. There are more than 2 kinds of bodies, but they call the baby a boy or a girl based on what they see. This might sound like the end of the story, but really it's just the beginning. And then each chapter of our book ends with questions. So part of how we are not prescriptive is we think that our questions are as important as the information we give. So the questions at the end of this chapter are, what did they call you when you were born? And why do you think people want to know if a baby is a boy or a girl? Okay, moving to the next, this is a new chapter, which is about sort of sexual, gender identity, and it's called What We Call Ourselves. And in the book, we use comics. So there's a comic and we see children, it may be during recess at school, a school break, and the teacher blows the whistle, tweet. And the teacher says, okay, people, boys line up on the right, girls line up on the left. And then we see the character Zai, who's in the middle, and we see they have a question mark over their head and there's some emotional thing happening, but we don't know exactly what. And the teacher says to Zai, what's the holdup, Zai? And Zai says, and we can see that Zai is blushing. When we are born, a doctor or midwife calls us boy or girl because of what we look like on the outside. They choose a word or label, usually boy or girl or male or female, to describe our bodies. But that's based on our outside, our cover, who they think we are. What about our whole body, inside and out? What about who we think we are? As we grow into being a kid and then an adult, we get to figure out who we are and what words fit best. Most boys grow up to be men, and most girls grow up to be women. But there are many ways to be a boy or a girl, and there are many ways to grow up and become an adult. For most of us, words like boy and girl or man and woman feel okay, and they fit. For some of us, they don't. Maybe you're called a boy, but you know you're a girl. You know how girls are treated and what they do. That's how you want to be treated and what you want to do. Maybe you're called a girl, but you feel like you're a boy. You know how boys are treated and what they do. That's how you want to be treated and what you want to do. Maybe you aren't sure or don't care that much. Maybe you don't feel like a boy or a girl. Maybe you feel like both. Maybe you just need some time to figure it out without all the boy-girl stuff. Because everyone's bodies are different, all our feelings are different too. Part of being a kid is learning what you like and what you don't like and who you are. That's part of being a grown-up too. We never stop learning or changing. And these are the last two pages that I'm going to read. And on the left, this is a sort of device we use, which is we have these 4 key terms: respect, trust, joy, and justice. And we come back to these words throughout the book. And so here we have the characters, each sort of making a statement. So respect says, pay close attention to the words people use when they talk about themselves. And Zai is wearing the trust t-shirt, and Zai says, trust yourself to know what words feel right and fit for you. And Mimi, who's wearing a shirt that says joy, says, try to enjoy your body, no matter what it's called. And Omar says, the one who knows most about you, about who you are, is you. And then this chapter ends with questions, and the questions are, what do you think about the words boy and girl? Why do you think those words are important to people? Are they important to you? Do you know anyone for whom those words don't fit? So I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. And I'm going to stop talking. Yeah, I want to leave a lot of time or leave the time. So, so thank you. And please ask questions or.
Thank you. I was just clapping in Spanish Sign Language to you.
It's the same in ASL.
Yeah, great. I'm just amazed how many things we have in common, Cory. We are in pretty much the same age. I'm going to be 52 this summer. So we had similar cultural experiences growing in the 70s. And many things that you've said resemble, and get back to me in different ways. And the way you were questioning that there is not a consensus on many words that we use in daily life, such as gender, but also sex, which is, a really problematic word because it means so many things, or gender equality. And one thing that you said, it was especially moving to me, which is listening to young people, listening to children. I'm working in a European funded project right now on LGTB children. And we just spent many days going to schools, to youth groups, to transgender parents associations to talk to children. And the one thing all the children, they don't know each other, say is they want adults to listen to them. So when it is so clear in different countries, different ages, different places, different moments, that they are asking us one particular thing, and that we are unable to listen to them. So my question is, how can we fight this lack of acknowledgement of children's agency, children's capability to think about their own bodies, their own experiences with such a knowledge that enables them to come to make decisions and so on. So I don't really have like a precise question, but what do we do with this? So how do we persuade other adults that we are wrong about prohibiting sexual education, that we are wrong about punishing, that we are wrong about the many things that we do to children, that is not listening to them. You know, the one precise question, you know, the one precise issue that we need to do is to listen to them. So how come that we are unable? Is it like an adultism bias that we have? How do we cope with this? How can we do a different sexual education that is not so much focused on the things that I'm scared of as a teacher, that is more focused on what is it that you need as a child?
Well, it's such a big question.
Sorry.
So I have two thoughts. Like I have a sort of there's the personal and there's the work. You know, part of the thing is, if we want to do this ourselves, we have to do the work. We have to realize, we have to look at why we don't listen to young people, why we always want to start by asking other adults, right? So one of my friends and colleagues, Bianca Laureano, she at all times, she keeps several youth mentors just in her life. And she's very clear. She's, you know, 40 something, that this is where she learns things. This is where she learns new things. You know, and I think there's lots of reasons why we don't listen to young people. And of course, it's complicated because, you know, young people don't know everything and they don't have the context that an older person has. So I'm certainly not saying, I am interested in creating things that are youth-led, but of course they're collaborative. So I think that's part of the problem. Is that for me, I find a lot of adults are like, well, you know, you can't let young people be in charge. And sometimes I'm like, well, sometimes you can, right? Number one, but number two, you know, it's about giving up a little more power. So personally, I think we have to do work on ourselves, right? I mean, and I'll say also for people who have been part of raising children, it gets harder, I think, if you raise children, because of course, all children feel like they're not being heard or listened to, including the ones who absolutely are being listened to, right? So I have many children in my life who have very attentive parents, some would say overly attentive parents, and they still feel like they're not being listened to. So that feeling, I think, is also just like, we need to acknowledge that's a human feeling. But so I think that for a lot of adults, when they go through raising a child, they kind of become numb to it. And they stop thinking, they really just think, oh, children need to be protected and kept, they need to be guided. But I'll say two other things. One is that young people are already doing this, right? So the adults who want to, the right-wing groups and the white supremacist groups who want to somehow shut down, like in Texas, who take the sex education books out of the library. There's so many queer kids in Texas, and not just queer kids, but like straight kids who are exploring and experimenting with orientation. They're online, the barn doors, it's an English saying, but the doors are open already. And so we need to acknowledge that young people are already doing it. They're already showing us that they can lead. Those are more like teenagers and people in their 20s. The younger you get, the fewer rights they have, the more oppressed they are, right? And this is an interesting thing about working across countries and borders, is of course a young person's experience in Spain around gender, it will be different than here in Canada. But something that's true for both children is they have very few rights, is that they are told they have to go to school. They are told they have to sit in a room, and they are fed a curriculum that they have no choice over. And so I think that's, for me, that's an interesting place to start. That's how I think about connections between all children. But as for how do we do it with younger and younger groups, I do think that in North America, there's a large group of parents who are actually supportive of this, bigger than ever before, who actually know that having children be critical thinkers at a very young age is a survival skill. So I think it's changing slowly, because those parents are involved in schools and school councils, right? But of course, we're experiencing such a pushback from the right wing right now So now so much of our work is just like trying to survive and protect ourselves and our children. So it's going to be hard, but I have hope. I mean, I think things are going in a direction of more options, and so I think that's good. And I think the last thing I'll say is, like, I think a lot of what Val was sharing, like when I'm working with educators, is to give them the space to talk about their fears, and then also talk about their own experience, right? How did their experience of sex education, what they were missing? Because this is this thing with my books, I wrote them for kids, but so many adults tell me that they learned about gender in my books, right? So many, people in their 40s and 50s learned, and so because we didn't get the education, right? And we tell this lie in the world, which is like sex education. You need sex education until you're 18, and then no more, right? And it's like, as if, of course, all of us who are over 18 know that's not true. Yeah. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, I have had the experience of having young people, like young adults reading your books and say, hey, I've learned a lot of things as well. So it is true that since we decide that sexuality needs to be taught when you're adolescent, and then it's over. So we're missing the chance to reach other people. You have a question from Estelle, and she says that she loved your idea of being non-normative, and that in fact from the SexAFIN project that she's working at the Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, she's reminding us that the work they do with teachers and educators and how they do workshops and how often they try to open the possibilities for a number of identities and sexual orientation, for example, and try not to fix people or identities within time. But at the same time, they find people that say that for them, it was really important to find a concept, a word such as being asexual or being non-binary, I would say from my own experience. So it's both the idea of trying not to be really normative or prescriptive on what it means to have certain experience or identity, while at the same time, for many people, many young people, finding what it is to be asexual, to be non-binary is being eye-opening, is being really meaningful to them. So how do you feel about this debate going from, we shouldn't give people labels to people who find themselves using a label that becomes useful, at least for a period of time in their lives?
Yeah. I mean, so for me, I'll answer that as an educator. As an educator, we do need to start somewhere. So I've read books about gender where it says gender is everything. Gender is fluid, and gender is beautiful, and they never use the word boy or girl. And I understand they don't want to do that because they don't want to start with a binary. But as a teacher, I don't think that works, because we grow up in the binary. So in our books, for example, we start with this phrase, boys, girls, and the rest of us. And so I don't know how it will translate, but in English, saying boys, girls, and the rest of us, what it does is it suggests that actually the rest of us are the biggest group. So linguistically, it does a little trick. It says, well, there's boys, there's girls, and then there's the rest of us. So I do think we need to start with words, right? We need language. And the hard thing is, how do we offer these labels without saying, you must be this? So for example, in the old days, gay would be described as a man who has sex with another man. That is not the definition of gay, right? That is one definition, but it's not, when you ask gay men, certainly they will say all sorts of things. So for me, my definition is bigger. But even then, there'll be a reader who will read it and they'll think, oh, maybe I'm gay. I do have a crush on a boy. I'm a boy, I have a crush on a boy, maybe I'm gay. But then they'll be like, oh, but I'm not these other things, right? So the problem is that it's I think labels are very helpful at a time. Like you said, Lucas, for me, they've been very helpful. The word queer really saved me. But they're also confining. So for me, I tell kids that. I say, like, labels can be very helpful, and they can be freeing, and they can help us find other people, right? Again, like it's hard when you're young and online. If you don't have a label, it's harder to find your people. But of course, your people might not always be the people who share the label, right? So we talk about that in the books. We do that a lot, where we show like two people who maybe they both say lesbian, and like one, they look very different and they listen to different music and they don't even like each other, right? Because, this is the important thing, because we never tell kids this. We say, you know, you're this or you're this, and then you go there, you go there. And this is the normativity. So yeah, for me, I'm very much like, I think like labels are, well, first of all, labels are part of our life. So to offer to try to teach without referencing labels, I think makes the lesson harder for anyone. I think we need to ground our sex education and gender education in the experience of our young people, right? So we need to talk about the gender binary because they experience it. Mm-hmm. But we need to always say there's more, right? So in this book, in the sex book, I don't know if I'll find it, you know, we chose to offer gender identity definitions because so many parents, they are like, I don't know the terms. So we did this, we have this, I'm gonna try to find it while I'm doing, yeah. So there's these 2 pages, and each of these is a definition. You know, but because it's for young people, the definitions need to be short. They can't be a page long, and it needs to be in plain language. And so they're never perfect, of course. And sometimes they're just okay. But so I spend a whole page beforehand saying that. I say, you're about to turn the page and you're going to read these definitions. These definitions, many of these may already be old by the time you're reading this book, and that's okay. And you should, you know, and there's an illustration where we show someone crossing words out in a book and writing their own words. So that's my take. I think like labels are important, but we need to talk to kids, young people, about how they're also confining. And then that's just a developmental experience, right? I think we've all experienced that when we like find a group, but maybe it's like that we love tennis or video gaming or being queer or whatever. And it's great. And then of course we get older and we're like, oh, but I don't want to go out to bars anymore. and I'm not in good shape, and I don't want to have to be in good shape. And so then these groups are not for me. But that's something we all have to learn. I think the important thing is that we tell them in advance that it changes, that we're always changing.
Yeah, I agree totally. I was thinking about when we were preparing this session for today, you said something that it was important to me. You said that it is a good thing not to start with a biology class when you talk about sexual education. And that's precisely what we do all the time. We start by showing the female, the male body opposed to each other, and showing the sexual difference as if this is a fact that speaks for itself, rather than we even give names to different body parts that can be changed. We talk differently to little children because we are unable to say penis, or because we are unable to say vulva, you know. And I don't know, maybe you want to talk about why you don't want to start by biology. I know why I don't want to start by biology, but maybe you have more interesting things to say.
Yeah, I don't know if they're more interesting. They're probably the same, because it's not interesting, because it's the most narrow place to start a conversation. When I'm training educators, the example I often give is to, if you were in a room full of teachers and you were to invite them to start talking about sexual orientation, and then you give them 10 minutes, have a conversation about sexual orientation. And then you pause and you say, have a conversation about desire. And they go for 10 minutes. And when you do this activity, you see immediately the energy in the room is totally different, right? Sexual orientation is this biomedical concept that is, I think it's not a good concept. I think I don't like it at all. I only use the term because it's expected, but I completely deconstruct it in my book because I think it doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense to young people anymore either. So sexual orientation is that's the idea of starting with the biomedical. To talk about desire, which might be my desire for ice cream, or my desire for sexual touch, or my desire to have a best friend or to be hugged. Like, it's so much richer. It's so beautiful. It's so interesting. And it allows us to start with ourselves. And the same thing is true with, to start a lesson about sex ed with reproduction. It makes no sense. Most sex that we have, I mean, I tell young people this all the time, 99, maybe 95% of the sex that happens on the planet is not for reproduction. And so why do we start with that? And so that's what this one, this book, the thing that was so different about this book is that it's a whole book about sex and there's nothing but reproduction. So we don't talk about, not only do we not explain reproduction, we don't talk about the uterus. We talk about the vulva and the clitoris and the vagina, but we don't talk about menstruation. We don't talk about sperm because these things, because these things are separate. And the other thing I'll say about that is kids know this because when you look at the media, right? If you look at movies, television, online, music, when they talk about sex, they're not, I mean, like every now and again, there's something about reproduction, but the vast majority of sex that's talked about and relationships and crushes, like sex as a big picture, it's not about reproduction. And as you said, the thing with the bodies is so harmful. I mean, to me, it is a form of violence for some of us because it doesn't just say, it says like, of course, these are there's two bodies and these are the parts and they're different, right? And there's this one book that's terrible. And actually what it does is it draws these lines. It shows like both bodies have two eyes, same. Both bodies have two arms, same. And then it points to the genitals, penis and vulva, different. And of course, that is also not true. And it's just such an unimaginative way of thinking about our bodies. So that's my response.
Yeah, I was thinking, I'm preparing classes for the next semester. And I was looking at a book on the psychology of emotions. And I was looking at the sex part. And I was so upset, it was really late at night and I started, in my place. And because not only they talk about sex as a matter of reproduction, but also they talk about sex as a matter of the consciousness as a species that needs to be reproduced and perpetuate through history, as if when people have sex are thinking about the species. Even when I see, documentaries on television and they talk about, I don't know, lions, in the wildness, I don't think lions are thinking about the reproduction of the species either. This narrative of reproduction and the species being perpetuated over the earth. When the earth, is overpopulated by people, not lions, I think is really harmful because we are thinking that we try to be somehow scientific and we are just saying things that doesn't make any sense. I don't think it made sense in the past, but it don't make sense now either, Yeah.
And I'll say that when I'm with young people, they say that, right? So including like 7- and 8-year-olds will say, this doesn't make sense, right? Because they're growing up in a world that's different than ours. And the media they're exposed to is different. And so the things they're learning are different. So yeah, I do think it's going to change. I think we will see more and more change in the material. I think it's the institutions, right? It's like, how do we get this into schools, right? So, I'm very lucky because I write these books. And I'll say in North America, they are being used. In Canada, there's one province that bought this book for every school in the province.
Wow.
The province of New Brunswick. So it's slow, but in the United States, no, forget it. And so yeah, so this is the thing is how do we get it more accessible, make it available?
And I was just asking in the chat whether people had questions or not, because I can be talking to Cory all day, all night. And also you mentioned something, between someone said something, maybe if someone wants to ask. You said something about having because this is something I say as well, and I like that we coincide, the relevance of being able to imagine yourself, which is really, I've seen this really, happening to young children. And I've seen it even in deaf people. 30 years ago, I knew lots of deaf queer people, and how many of them thought they were gonna die before they were 18, because they didn't know any deaf grown-ups.
Yeah, this is
I don't know, the
yeah.
idea of having someone to look up to think you can imagine the future. And with this, we're going to finish because Estelle is telling me the people translating and typing must be super tight. I'm sorry about this, Adria. But maybe you want to get back to this about the need to see yourself with a future, you know, like feeling that your experience resembles other experiences.
Yeah, I'll just say one quick thing, which is in our books, we show a lot of old people. And again, there's of course, there's this bias that older people aren't sexual. So in sex education materials, you don't see old people very much. Or if you see them, they're just like being nice to each other. It's like touching them in the face. So for us, it's important that we see a lot of old people. We see like old people who look queer. We see old people who are disabled, but who are out and happy and doing things. Because we just need more. We need more artists. We need more writers, right? This is what you're bringing up is sort of, I'm not sure how much sex education can do about that, because it's also like, it's in the culture. It's this imagination that only certain people have the privilege of getting old. And so we need more of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Cory, it's been a pleasure. As I said, we'll try to come up with excuses to bring you back online or in person, hopefully, because it's been amazing talking to you. I'm super glad that we had this opportunity to be online, to get to know you more and to enjoy your insights. Thank you so much. My heart is happy today. So I can send you hugs and kisses also for Estelle and Bruna and all the people who are working really hard today, the interpreters.
Yes.
And
okay. Well, thank you. And thank you very much. Thanks to the interpreters and to everybody for listening. Oh, and the slide that I gave is a slide that has my contact information. People should feel free. If you're looking for resources or have a question, you can always just email me. You can find me online. Bye, everyone.
bye.
Thank you, Cory. Con el resto de personas, muchísimas gracias por estar aquí, a Lucas, a Cory, todo el mundo. Nos vemos mañana a las 9:30. Hasta mañana.